The earliest 19th were the most exploding years for the United States. First, the World War I was a great challenge for American culture. Despite their success in the fighting, it left important consequences which make their historical background understandable. American soldiers had to live by themselves the horror of a war, and as a result, it became a broken and sick society. We can notice the situation in the tale Soldier Home by Ernest Hemingway, which tells the story of a soldier who lives those hard emotions as a product of war hostility. But not all the consequences are negative. Because of Americans' triumph in the war, an age of wealth, luxury, business success, parties, alcohol smuggling, and jazz music had an explosion through the highest levels of American society. The tale A Diamond as Big as a Ritz by Scott Fitzgerald and The Great Gatsby show this kind of American madness, lack of control, double standard, and inappropriate behaviors regarding to moral and traditional issues. In addition, it was one of the causes of the most devastating event in the U.S.A., the Great Depression. Cinderella Man is a movie which profiles the poorness and economic difficulties of a common American family. They used to live in comfortable conditions, but after the market crashed, even though getting a steak was very hard for them and many others. Therefore, the instability suffered by the American people and testified by the beginning of a new century detonated in the power and strength of a potentially creative and destructive nation.
First of all, the First World War took place from the 28 July 1914 to 11 November 1918 in Europe, and one of its main causes was the murder of an Archduke Austro-Hungarian called Franz Ferdinand. Also, because of the main alliances, the allies formed by Serbia, Russia, British Empire, and Japan, and the Central Powers formed by Austro-Hungary, Ottoman Empire, and Bulgaria. Another cause is the imperialism seen in Africa caused by Europe, linked to the desire of independence of those colonies, and some European countries helped to begin the war, just like the recently increase of military buildup in Germany. So, another countries joined to the alliance against Germans as US did in 1917 because at the beginning of the war US was neutral, just selling guns, ammunition and supplies for both sides, till Mexico became an ally of Germany, which made US angry and take the decision to fight. During the whole war, more than 70 million of soldiers were called up to fight, leading at least 9 million of deaths on both sides, due also to the new war and technological inventions, like submarines, tanks, the telegraph, machine guns, long-range artillery, flamethrowers, and poisonous gas, a new kind of war. When the end of the war was coming, US took part of it, sending soldiers at a rate of 250,000 per month, also decreasing Germans' morale, caused by their lack of soldiers and supplies, which had been almost overused without having ways to earn a new ones. Therefore, Germany had to ask US President to lead a treaty of peace between the Allies and the Central Powers. This caused an armistice, an agreement to stop fighting, while the decision was taken. It took effect on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month of 1918. The Treaty of Versailles was signed on June 28, 1919. It was meant to end the war, bring peace, and to hold Germany responsible for paying for the war. But this just would be the end of the beginning.
Hi, I'm Edward, and today I'm going to speak about the 20th century in USA, especially in the jazz age. We already know the jazz, a kind of music genre with a very special mood. But during 1930 to 1940 in USA, the people knew the jazz age. After the First World War, cities as Chicago, New Orleans, and New York had an economic stability. In that context, the jazz music grew as the cities. According to Nietzsche, the human being has two spirits, the Apollonian and the Dionysian spirit. The first one regulates morals and principles. You need to work, study, and be responsible. The second one allows to explore leisure and debauchery. You need to be responsible, of course, but you need to go to a party and relax your body too. People of all social levels in USA celebrate their life after a horrible war. They needed to explore the Dionysian spirit through the parties and, of course, the jazz music. Now we are going to watch the scene of the epic party in The Great Gatsby by Baz Luhrmann to show the spirit in the jazz age.
You see, the rest of New York simply came, uninvited. The whole city packed into automobiles, and all weekend, every weekend, ended up at Gatsby's. And I mean everyone, from every walk of life, from every corner of New York City. This kaleidoscopic carnival spilled through Gatsby's door. My invitation. Oh, just my throat. You don't need to know the guy. Certainly not invitation. Caravansary of billionaire playboy publishers and their blonde nurses. Heiresses comparing inheritances on Gatsby's beach. My boss, Walter Chase, losing money at the roulette tables. Gossip columnists alongside gangsters and governors exchanging telephone numbers. Film stars, Broadway directors, morality protectors, high school defectors, and Ewing Klipspringer, dubious descendant of Beethoven. You know where I might find the host, Mr. Gatsby? I live just next door.
Gatsby? I've never seen Mr. Gatsby, sir. Why, no one has.
Alone and a little embarrassed, I decided to get roaring drunk.
The shining colors in the scene are related to the shining sound of the wind instruments, such as clarinets and trumpets. The speed of the planes is related to the movements of the Charleston dance. We feel a happy mood of the people thanks to money and the social stability. On the other hand, the U.S.A. society had a problem with the moral. Andrew J. Bolstead, a Republican soda, promote a law. The prohibition was a nationwide constitutional ban on the production, importation, transportation, and sale of alcoholic beverage from 1920 to 1933. If you want to increase the prices of a product, the best way is to prohibit it. The society wanted to drink alcohol and listen jazz, dance all the night after the war. Therefore, some criminals called gangsters took advantage about the prohibition. They could produce alcohol and sell it in hidden clubs even during the day. Gatsby is an alcohol smuggler. He has money and power thanks to contraband. The next scene shows us the parties in that kind of clubs, of course with the jazz music as the soundtrack.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, I have a...
Ah! My boy!
Meyer.
Smells so good. Look at it.
Look at you, Mr. Carraway. This is my good friend, Mr. Meyer Wolfshine.
A wonderful pleasure, Mr. Carraway.
My pleasure.
I know all about you.
I see.
Yes, Mr. Gatsby's always talking about you.
Really? Shall we?
Come. Join us for a little lunch.
Benjamin Franklin's field, folded just for the thrill. Go numb until I can't feel. All right, pop this pill. Stock market just crash. Now I'm just the bill. History don't repeat itself, it rhymes. 1929 steel.
Tell Walter Chase. He keeps his mouth shut or he doesn't get a penny.
We'll talk about that later.
Eyeballs, Mr. Gatsby.
Eyeballs it is. All right. Take care of my friend.
Go on then.
Get the decadence. Ill reverence.
See these fists? He's the next heavyweight champion.
Pay my respects to you, Bob.
The gangsters were people with power and money. They had relations with politicians, police, artists, sportsmen, film stars, and other public figures. The power provided of the contraband of alcohol and the control of the jazz clubs. In conclusion, the Jazz Age expressed the feeling of the USA after the First World War. Also, it was the age of the prohibition, the gangster, and a beautiful music. Also, we could find a literary perspective about the Jazz Age in the tale The Diamond as Big as Wrist by Scott Fitzgerald. The writer lived in that age and wrote about the feeling inside the jazz society.
The Diamond as Big as the Ritz is not only a fantastic tale, but also a critic to the North American principles. The grandfather of Percy was called Fitznorman Washington. He gained the biggest fortune a man in planet's history had ever gained by discovering the biggest diamond in the world. It literally was as big as the Ritz-Carlton Hotel. In other words, it was a diamond-made mountain. He decided to keep it in secret in order to guarantee all of that money for his family. In order to do this, he hurts people, he kills people, and he manipulates people. He was a George Washington descendant. That's to say that the same family that founded and expanded the country also hurts and manipulates society. The same thing they do. They invade territories and kill people in order to exploit their resources. And by the other hand, we have people in the country that beg God for mercy and forgiveness. We can think about the slaves Fitznorman brought to the chateau by telling them that in the South, slavery was still being legal. He also shot the planes flying over the mountain and kidnapped the pilots to safeguard his treasure. In the story, we can find, by other side, allegories to youth. Youth as a dream, something lost and unjoined due to the social problems brought by World War I and the Great Depression, where jobs works was devalued and all offices and arts was in decadence. Scott Fitzgerald sees youth as a lost dream that he wants someday to come back. We can see that in the following passage. He was enjoying himself as much as he was able. It is youth's felicity as well as its insufficiency that can never live in the present, but must always be measuring up the day against his own brilliantly imagined future. Flowers and gold, girls and stars, they are only prefigurations and prophecies of that incomparable dream. But we can see, too, in the story, references to resignation and acceptance of their new poverty condition brought by World War I and the Great Depression. After the destruction of the mountain, the three survivors make us laugh at their attitudes, instead their new poverty condition. His mind is excited at the prospect of being poor. John isn't even upset about the fact that she left the diamonds behind. And Jasmine's attitude is best described as a sort of contented acceptance. Oh well, they seem to say, now we are going to be poor for the rest of our lives. That is not a big deal. Let's take a nap. Well, about the most principal characters, we have three. Kismine Washington, Fitznorman Washington, and John T. Anger. Kismine Washington was, since the start of the story, just like a human giant diamond. She's flawless. She's the most perfect woman a man could ever find. She's a treasure. She's so perfect, she doesn't have any problem with the new poverty condition. Unfortunately, she doesn't understand the real value of anything, not even of human life. About Fitznorman Washington, we can say that he was a direct descendant of George Washington, and that he discovered a giant diamond that he decided not to share with the nation he could have made rich. Instead of that, he decided to become the richest man in the world by manipulating people, killing and kidnapping them. He changes only with the death of his diamond. John T. Anger. At the beginning of the story, John thinks about rich people what anyone else would think about rich people. They are magnificent and awesome and perfect, especially with richness in it. I like very rich people, he said. The richer a fella is, the better I like him. In spite of that, he lived in a small town in Mississippi. But when he goes off to school, he journeys into St. Midas, an unknown world where wealth means all, definitely a new world. John T. Anger doesn't seem to have learned anything about all that mess. We can read his words. There are only diamonds in the whole world. Diamonds are perhaps the shabby gift of disillusion. Well, I have that last, and I will make the usual nothing of it. All he loves is diamonds, and then he discovers diamonds are material, substance like any other object in the universe. He's been disillusioned. At least, he thinks that fact is valuable. Maybe he's learned a lesson about the dangers of extravagant wealth and the immorality of attaining it on the back of the others. Only future will say if the United States have really learned the lesson or not.
The Great Depression. On October 24, 1929, it was called Black Thursday. There was a bankruptcy of the New York stock market, which provoked a prolonged period of deflation. The crisis quickly moved to the whole of the U.S., European, and other areas of the world economy. One of its most immediate consequences was the collapse of the international payment system. The Great Depression of 1929 was the worst economic crisis and the most devastating time for American citizens and the whole world. Let's go to see what were the main causes consequences and solutions of this historical phenomenon. The main causes. 1. The stock market crash. The stock market soared throughout most of the 1920s, and the more it grew, the more people were eager to pour money into it. Many people bought on margin, which meant they paid only part of a stock's worth when they bought it, and the rest when they sold it. That worked fine as long as stock prices kept going up. But when the market crashed in the late October 1929, they were forced to pay up on stocks that were no longer worth anything. Many more had borrowed money from banks to buy stocks, and when the stock market went belly up, they couldn't repay their loans and the banks were left holding the empty bag. The Wall Street crash. The main cause of the New York stock market crash was speculation. The 1920s were good for the United States. As Galbraith says, the richest got richer much faster than the poor stopped being. In addition, the Americans deployed an astonishing eagerness to enrich themselves quickly and with minimal effort. The speculative mood was growing day by day, and in the case of Florida, where men from the north threw themselves to buy land that increased in value without apparent motives, it is proof of that. The speculation came to the stock market thanks to the rules of Wall Street and by the rise that during the decade of 20s occurred in the ordinary share. Business was fast and profitable. There were many small savers who decided to invest and made it their way of life. The stockbrokers lent their clients by taking as collateral the purchased titles themselves, and in turn, they borrowed to the banks to buy those titles because with the profits of the stock exchange could be paid the credits and their interests. 2. Bank failures. Many small banks, particularly in rural areas, had overextended credit to farmers who, for the most part, had not shared in the prosperity of the 1920s and often could not repay the loans. Big banks, meanwhile, had foolishly made huge loans to foreign countries. Why? So the foreign countries could repay the earlier debts from the World War I. When times got tough and the U.S. banks stopped lending, European nations simply defaulted on their outstanding loans. The result of all this was that many banks went bankrupt. Others were forced out of business when depositors panicked and withdrew their money. The closings and panics almost completely shut down the country's banking system. 3. Too many poor people. That may sound sort of goofy, but it's a real reason. While the overall economy had soared in the 1920s, most of the wealth was enjoyed by relatively few Americans. In 1929, half of the families in a country were still living at or below the poverty level. That made them too poor to buy goods and services and too poor to pay their debts. With no markets for their goods, manufacturers had to lay off tens of thousands of workers, which of course just created more poor people. Here we have an example of this issue in the Cinderella Man's movie.
Hey, Dad!
Hey,
No ships today, Dad!
what are you doing, son?
I'm being good. I'm being quiet. I'm being safe.
Great.
Daddy! Daddy!
Hey, Rosie Cheek, how you doing?
Daddy! Jay stole!
What?
Jay stole.
What's all this about?
See? It's a salami.
Young lady, your brother's in enough trouble without you telling on him. You understand? It's from the butcher's. And you won't say a word about it, will you, Jay?
Will you, Jay?
Okay, pick it up. Let's go. Do not test me, boy. Right now.
Howard, stay here.
Marty Johnson had to go away to Delaware to live with his uncle.
Why?
His parents didn't have enough money for them to eat.
Yeah, well, things ain't easy at the moment, Jay. You're right. There's a lot of people worse off than what we are. And just 'cause things ain't easy, that don't give you the excuse to take what's not yours, does it? That's stealing, right? We don't steal. No matter what happens, we don't steal. Not ever. You got me? Are you giving me your word?
Yes,
Go on.
I promise.
And I promise you, we will never send you away. It's okay, kid. You got a little scared, I understand. It's okay.
4. Farm failures. Many American farmers were already having a hard time before the Depression, mostly because they were producing too much and farm product prices were too low. Things were so bad in some areas that farmers burned corn for fuel rather than sell it. Then, one of the worst droughts in recorded history hit the Great Plains. The Midwest became known as the Dust Bowl. Dry winds picked up tons of topsoil and blew it across the prairies, creating huge, suffocating clouds of dirt that buried towns and turned farms into abandoned deserts. The main consequences. 1. Unemployment. It constitutes the first and most terrible consequence of the Great Depression. In 1932, there were in the world 40 million of unemployed. In the United States were total unemployment and partial unemployment. The first is accompanied by begging, sickness, and overcrowding in the cities of LYCA, called overvilles ironically in the United States, and in the suburbs of the big cities. Partial, even less dramatic, unemployment also affected daily life. In the United States, it is estimated that 63 per 100 of industrial workers were engaged on a part-time basis, so that already low wages became hunger wages. Youth suffer even more harshly this situation because the search of a first job were completely useless and the schools could not support the extension of schooling. Here we have an example of this issue in the Cinderella Man's movie.
The thing is, I can't afford to pay the heat. I've had to farm out my kids. You know, they keep cutting shifts down at the docks, and you just don't get picked every day. I sold everything I got that anybody would buy. I went on public assistance. I signed on at the relief office. They gave me $19. I need another $18.38 so I can pay the bill and get the kids back. You know me well enough to know if I had anywhere else to go, I wouldn't be here. If you could help me through this time, I sure would be grateful.
Sure, Jim. Sure. Good luck.
Jim.
Hey, Jimmy.
Here you go, Jim.
What the hell do you have to be sorry about? Jesus Christ, Jim. How sure are you?
About $1.50.
2. Demographic descent. It is produced by the decline of marriage, birth, and migration, coupled with increased infant and senile mortality. Different political regimes established different demographic measures to cope with the crisis. Liberal democracies tended to restrict birthing to alleviate the social effects of the crisis, unemployment, while totalitarian regimes, especially German, encouraged population growth for ideological reasons. As for migration, the United States refused to enter immigrants. In this regard, the crisis also contributed to changing the prevailing status quo in the world. 3. Social inequality. The crisis accentuated social inequalities because although there were major bankruptcies in their business, the personal assets of the rich did not diminish much, while the depression affected the middle and lower classes. The middle and small bourgeoisie, renters, liberal professionals, medium and small traders, suffered in a very special way the onslaught of the crisis, impoverishing and being workers. Many sought the solution in fascism. But on the one who most relapsed the weight of the crisis was on the proletariat, which even came to subdivide into different strata as industrial, rural, standing, semi-stop, or with permanent work. Solutions. The New Deal by Franklin Roosevelt. The New Deal was a set of economic measures put in place by U.S. President Franklin Roosevelt between 1933 and 1937 to act energetically on what was considered the causes of the serious economic crisis of 1929. This new economic policy was based on state interventionism and the firm belief in the theories of underconsumption. Among the measures carried out include devaluation of the dollar, recovery of the purchasing value of the agricultural sector, reactivation of industrial production, increasing wages, reducing working hours, and with a rise in prices to correct downturns caused by depression, in-depth subsidy policy lost to struggling banks, directed policy to fight unemployment.
As a conclusion, the First World War represented a little triumph for the USA. That war proved not only the power of the American giant, but also the evil and the chaos inside human being. The USA felt the same emotion as the lavish soldier in the Hemingway tale. Nobody wins in the war. We are all foreigners in our own country. After that, in the Jazz Age, the population celebrates the American dream. The social stability, the greatest parties, and especially the jazz music as a soundtrack. A shining age described by Fitzgerald. Gatsby is a modern hero. He wanted glory and love, but he found a lamentable final. The hero must to die to reveal the malice of the culture, even when the hero just wanted Daisy's love. Likewise, the Great Depression changed the future in USA. The workers looked like sheep in a flock. The banks crushed the poorest people, even as we watched in the Cinderella Man, the sportsmen and artists suffered the consequence too. The first part of the 20th century in USA had a war, an eternal jazz party, and a social depression in the collective idea of nation. It seems as a roller coaster.